Welcome and thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My name is Ali Jama, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is Alex Boulting, a trained economist, a speaker, and an expert in building change capability. A passionate change expert, Alex has developed his own practice around helping organizations adapt to the ever-changing environments. In this episode, Alex and I chat about organizations and how they can adopt a long-term change capability mindset and build the environment to help people navigate through change. I'm grateful to have Alex chatting with me today. So Alex, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am grateful for your time.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks for thinking of me and getting in touch. And I'm looking forward to the session.
Excellent, thank you so much. And before we start, Alex, today I'd like to touch on a couple of points and around organizational change and around really how we need to focus on doing the basics right in terms of the current change management practices. But before we start, and it will be fantastic if you can introduce yourself to my listeners.
Yeah, so, I'm Alex Boulting. I originally trained as an economist. So I was actually doing energy demand forecasting for the UK government and running sort of complex models for a few years. But I always wanted to get into transport. So then I got into transport forecasting and sort of traveled the world a bit in that work. And then I moved to a company, London Underground, where I'd always wanted to work for and had a passion for, coming from London myself. And that was all about trying to get increased usage of public transport. So it's fundamentally about behavioural change, which is what economics is about, really. So we were inventing new products and trying to estimate people's sort of responsiveness to that. And then you sort of move up the management ladder, don't you? And I ended up managing a contact center of 150 people, and we were trying to do sort of, behavioral change. We were trying to improve the performance of the contact center. We're trying to integrate new CRM systems into the contact center. And then I realized actually the answer wasn't in the numbers. I could crunch the numbers for as long as I wanted to, but I wasn't going to find an answer there, and I had to understand people and engage with people. And that started my journey in organisational change, really. Yes. But it wasn't until 2010 that I thought I really need to try and get qualifications. So I did my ADCAR thing. And that really got me onto my path of where I am now, of do people really believe this stuff? Do people really believe these models? Because I was there sort of scratching my head when people said things like, everybody hates change, or resistance is our natural response to change. And I thought, I was, looking around the room and wondering, really? Because I quite like it. I quite like the challenge, the curiosity. And so that got me into doing my master's in psychology and doing my CMI training as well. And
these are all complementary skills that you've got, Alex, because they all help with understanding the change journey a staff member or a team member goes through.
Yeah, so from a sort of very macro level, high level economic modelling, all the way down to talking to individuals about how we were going to help them get through the change and what the change meant from them. So yeah, it has been a very, very interesting journey over the past sort of 25 years or so.
So were you part of the nudge unit in the UK government? I think started with David Cameron at the time.
Nothing. No, I didn't.
Okay.
I'd left the UK government way before that.
You actually did mention something which I also want to touch on, what I call tired statements, that change is hard, everybody's going to resist change. What's your take on that?
So I started off, and it's interesting how our journeys progress, isn't it, through change? I guess lots of people have different people have different journeys through change. And when I was in that room questioning what this trainer was telling me when I was doing my ADCAR course, that kind of led later on to me doing lots of these myth busting. So I guess my followership, as it were, started through my myth busting on LinkedIn, which is up to sort of 25 myths now, where I sort of thought, well, I need to go away and actually look at the hard evidence to see whether what people are saying is true or not. And a lot of these things, they call them sort of zombie ideas or zombie myths. They just won't go away no matter how much. And that in itself is very interesting, because it just goes to show how embedded our beliefs can become when the education system that's, starting our whole belief process around what is change management, if that isn't right, then it's very difficult to go back. So I think that's where we need to change. We've got to get a robust body of knowledge within organisational change,
yes,
or change management, whatever you want to call it,
yes,
and start from there and use that as a platform. But I think we're on a road to nowhere if we carry on believing what we currently believe about people and change.
Yes, and I agree. I mean, these are assumptions that we need to keep challenging ourselves before we start spreading them and continue using them as well, because I think the workplace is far more modern now and far more adaptive than previously. I don't think we give a lot of credit to the people we work with and who is, the stakeholders who actually receive the change. And I think the practice is getting better as we progress. Definitely, when I got into the practice about 12 years ago, it was nowhere near now. However, I still hear about the assumptions and the tired statements around change. I want to ask you about what's your definition of organizational change?
Yeah, well, I again, this is a sort of another idea, I guess, that I've been sort of batting around, and that's when people talk about organisational change, organisational development, strategic HR management, change management, actually all the definitions are the same. They all come down to how do we build internal human capability to meet organisational external sort of ambitions. So it's how we create adaptive capability within an organisation that can respond to external challenges or meet external ambitions that organisations have. And you see that another word is dynamic capability, for instance, which David Treese has developed.
Yes.
But it's all the same stuff, and people keep repackaging it. And I moved away from change management because I don't think it's, we're not necessarily managing it. I think that gives the wrong impression. And I just called it organisational change. You could call it organisational development because that has the same ambition as well. Organisational development is a planned, systematic approach to enabling sustained organisational improvement through improvements of its people. And that's, that's another definition, isn't it, of change management, organisational change,
Absolutely. I think I was having a conversation the other day. A project is a change, and a change by definition, you will really gonna have to make a good assumption that an organization will spend money to introduce change with the intention of making things better, because nobody's going to spend money and then make things worse. Now, the outcome of the change may be really, not ideal, but the initial intention behind any change or development is that you move from A to B, and B is better than A. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm sort of fairly hot on sort of causal claims, that is it's a strong causal claim, isn't it? You're going into an organisation and saying, if we do X, we will move from A to B, and doing X is better than Y, because Y is going to get us to C and not to B.
Yes.
But this is what, back in 2010 when I started doing my qualifications, and you read Kotter and stuff like that, that it's not clear. It's not clear that what they are recommending, that process, that end step linear process, is actually going to deliver. Where is the evidence? Where does it say if you do this, then the likelihood is that you'll get a positive outcome? And I think this is why change management, organisational change, just has a bit of a bad rep. we can't prove that what we do as practitioners works. And that's kind of a bit odd, isn't it?
Well,
because if you're a lawyer, or if you're a fireman, or if you're a doctor, you know that spraying, water onto a fire is going to put it out.
Yes.
Or if I give you this medicine, the likelihood is that it's going to help you. We can't make any such claim, I don't think.
Well, you're bringing up a very interesting point, which is, from my experience, because the rate of change and the speed of change and the volume of it, there's little attention being paid to the outcome of those changes. Nobody's sitting in there, and now I am, for example, with one of my clients, I'm in a really, fortunate position that the client is giving me the space to actually go and find out and validate that as a result of change A, and now we are in B, a staff member life is better or a customer's life is better. And finding that evidence is really hard, because then you'll have to find a lot of data behind it. And I know that you are a big advocate of having a scientific mindset. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, yes, absolutely. And you could call it a scientific. The reason I call it a scientific approach is because if we're taking a sort of a scientific mindset, then we're not treating our beliefs as fundamental truths, which I think, we have a tendency to have, don't we? Because we hang on to them, we use them to predict our world. And if they're not right, then our world becomes a bit uncertain or too uncertain. So I think there's a changing mindset there, where we need to feel that our beliefs are hypothesis and that we go out and test them. And I think that's so much of a more engaging way to create change, where you go in as a change agent, don't we? We go into organizations and practitioners say, look, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what the problem is at the moment. You tell me what the problem is, and we'll work out and we'll test things. And we'll find out, as you said, what the outcomes are of those little experiments that we're going to run. And then we'll run another experiment. We'll keep learning, and we'll learn together. And maybe one thing works for you and it doesn't work for somebody else. That gives us an amazing contextual richness then. Then we start to understand, well, why is it that something works in one area of a company and then not in another area of a company? Is it the relationship with the manager? Is it because they're working in a different environment, different culture, whatever it is. And so we start to build an evidence base that's highly contextual and highly relevant to the organisation, which I think is the problem that people have with, one of the problems that people have with academic research, is that, they say, oh, it's conducted in a laboratory or it's not specific to this industry. Okay, maybe not, but it's a starting point. And we can use that as a way to sort of firm up our hypothesis, as it were, and then go out and test it. And wouldn't it be wonderful? This is what gives me goosebumps. If practitioners and academics could work together, and academics can help us run these experiments, and practitioners can go back to the academics and say that didn't work or that did work, and so we build a body of evidence together that's robust. And that's my dream, really. That's where I would like to be with this whole practice. That's what gives me.
If you're going to create a group
hope,
or a think tank group around change management or change practice, Alex, I put my hands up, and I can, I'll be the first to join you as well, and then share my my insight and what works and what doesn't work. I quite like that idea. Before we started recording, we actually did talk about a topic which is really important, and I just want to ask you about it again. We did talk about the phenomena or the notion that professionals need to do the basics and need to do them really well. And we did talk about that there are a couple of well-tried and well-tested change frameworks that are actually in the market, with some methodologies in there that are actually practical. So the question is, are we really that good at applying those and actually persisting and being patient with the execution of those methodologies? Or are we being impatient to actually try to do them and say they don't work, and therefore I'm going to have to create my own?
Yeah, and whatever you do, don't create your own, because there's enough out there. I think there's over 50,
Well,
60 different change.
recycle your own. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you can see that in whether it's team performance models. There's loads of those. There's loads of models out there if you look for them, and very few of them are validated, have any sort of predictive validity. So you can do it, but you've got no idea what the outcomes are going to be. Yeah. So I kind of steer away from using models and think about what kind of capabilities an organisation needs to create internally to be able to adapt. And I think that's fairly clear from organisational development. What the Centre for Evidence-Based Management are doing, and the CIPD in the UK, which is the professional body for HR, people are doing in the UK, and what Change Management Institute now, which I think started out in Australia and is in the UK now, what they're starting to do, particularly the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, is create rapid evidence reviews or summaries of evidence to say, look, we can be pretty certain that if you try and instill psychological safety, for instance, or fair decision making, and there's a whole raft of theories and interventions that you can run around that, if you do these things, we can be pretty confident that people are going to be more accepting of change and more responsive to change and help other people through change and see why the organisation needs to change. So I think there's lots of what we call constructs out there that are well tried and tested that we can just start working with. And as you say, why invent new stuff when we've got lots of we've got at least, I think, 16 of these things that we can start working with, that we can start dialing up and dialing down, depending on what the context is of the organisation is.
Yes.
And then I think the next stage then is to understand what the interrelationships are between those things. So if we do dial up psychological safety, for instance, what happens to the quality of conversation when I give performance feedback? What happens to levels of trust in leadership, for example? And if we can start to understand those interrelationships, then we start to really get our bang for bucks, because we know if we do one intervention, we then get a whole multitude of benefits. And we know, for instance, psychological safety is a huge mediator for all sorts of benefits within organisations.
Yes.
So you can actually do very little and get a very huge benefit. So there's a good business case for doing this stuff, as opposed to, let's tell everybody that we're changing and run a fancy communications campaign and use our money for doing that.
Are you talking about when you talk about environment and those interventions, you really, and tell me if I'm wrong, you are talking about the culture of an organization?
Yeah, whatever that means.
That terms. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with culture is, we don't really know. There isn't a clear definition. Yes. We don't know whether it links to performance or not, whether it links to changeability. What I'm fundamentally talking about is behaviour. Is how do we get people to adopt new ways of working, new behaviours for the organisation to be able to move in a different way, to be able to respond to external forces. So if we're working remotely, for instance, we need to be able to use Teams, for example.
Yes.
We need to be able to be more digitally literate, as it were. If we're moving into an age of, lots of data, then HR practitioners need to become more numerate, for example. So how do we change that?
Alex, I want to ask you about, so now we touched on the organizational capability, let's just call it that, organizational capability to manage change. How do you did mention psychological safety is one component to help an organization manage change effectively or adapt to change. And we will talk about organization, we really talk about people here. What are the things that we need to consider to build that capability for an organization to, manage or adapt to change?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a sales pitch, I guess, a bit of a plug. So I've developed diagnostic tools. So I think it's important to go into an organization, you run a diagnostic, you you cast the net wide and see, okay, what's going on in this organization, and we can run the diagnostic against these capabilities that we know are important from all the research that we know. Yeah, if you get these capabilities right, the likelihood is that you're going to be able to change as an organization. So, that's organizational support, for instance. So do I see my organization to support me? So if I make this step out into the unknown, like you're stepping off a sort of a cliff, is the organization going to be there to offer me the steps to the other side of the of the gap, as it were? So that we know that's really important. We know that the quality of relationships that we have is critical for teamwork. So if we want teams to change, then how do people act optimally within teams in order for that team to function really well? And there are different perspectives. There's individual perspectives as well. We know individual resilience is a thing, and we know if we do certain things, we can boost resilience. And we know that if people are resilient, then when they do get things wrong, when we do fall down and fail sometimes, as we do in change, because it's a learning process, we can sort of bounce back. Sense of autonomy, sense of self-confidence, goal setting, having clear goals, knowing that the work that I do fits within my skill set, having feedback, getting feedback, having a dialogue. Trusting dialogues is really critical to change and performance as well. Having a clear sense of purpose, organizations having a clear sense of purpose, having the right processes in place to be able to manage, in a sort of loosely defined managed performance. So do we understand how we measure performance and whether those metrics are driving the right behaviors, whether processes are right, whether the HR policies and practices are really driving the change to the sort of systems side. So, we know all about this stuff. There's so much been written about it, and we just got to learn it and put it into practice.
So what do those data points tell you? So they give you information, and therefore, based on that, you build your insight, and based on the insight, you recommend a set of strategies. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so the diagnostic gives you, or a diagnostic, I think, should give you three things. It should tell you what people want, so people can rank. Yes, I feel we should build trust in leadership, for example. So I'm going to say that's really important. Maybe we know that trust in leadership is really low, so people have scored it really low. And we also understand the interrelationships between trust in leadership and other capabilities like perceived organisational support, or clear goal setting, or resilience, or whatever it is. So then we know which capabilities we need to pull in order to drive certain, in order to drive other capabilities. So if trust in leadership is low, for example, and we know there's a high correlation with psychological safety, and we know people have said, trust in leadership is a priority, then that becomes a really good change narrative where we can go out to the organisation and say, we can get bang for bucks for this, so we're not very good at it. We know people really want us to be good at it because that's what they've said. And we know if we do these things as an organisation, then we can increase trust in leadership. And so that creates a conversation. And then you can say to the finance department or the HR department, wherever it is, you can say, well, you experiment with this. You know what the outcome is, what we want. We want to increase, trust in leaders. You start a conversation in your area, and as an OD person, as a change practitioner, I'll come in and I'll say, well, these are kind of the interventions you should try. This other department are doing this. Why don't you try that? Let's see if that works. Yeah. And then you start a conversation, you empower people, you give people a sense of autonomy around, you get the picture.
Fantastic. I am thoroughly enjoying this conversation. Alex, you just gave me a few things to think about as well, myself. We are coming to the end of the podcast. I just want to cover one key thing. From your perspective, and I always ask this question to all of my guests, what would be your advice to the change practice community?
I think don't panic if you don't have a solution. You shouldn't have a solution. And I always feel when I go into organizations, I'm not saying this is the right way of doing it, but you almost want to stay as reflective for as long as possible, because as soon as, if you think of yourself as participating in a complex system, so that people are responding to what you're saying, as well as the other way around, that you're affecting your environment, then the more neutral, the more reflective you can stay, the more you're going to see of the true nature of the organisation and what's really going on. As soon as you start going in and imposing views or methods or solutions or whatever it is, then the whole system isn't working the way that it was before you came. So I think there's something around that, and I think whatever we do, we should do it in a humane way. I think that's the number one rule, isn't it?
Yes.
That if we believe in change, we believe in humans, and we believe in humans can change, then people have to believe that we're doing things in an ethical way. And that means not going in and deliberately creating pain. That means not believing that people deliberately undermine change through resistance. All these negative beliefs that we have, I think, then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the more ethical we can be in our beliefs, the more positive almost we believe in humans, the better the outcomes, I think.
Fantastic. Suspend your judgment as long as possible and show the highest level of care in your practice. These are really two great pieces of advice. Alex, it's been wonderful. How would people reach you?
Probably I'm quite, as you know, active on LinkedIn, and go to my website. You can see that, ebbnflow, ebbnflo.co.uk on there as well. I've got a YouTube channel, but yeah, you can find me there as well.
And we're going to put all of your information on the podcast. Alex, it's been a pleasure having you as my guest in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I hope to get you back and we talk more about the myth busting, but until then, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Stay well and stay safe.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ali. Next time you're in London, give me a call.
I will. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. To know more about my guests and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website and remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you my next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.